Chapter 1. The Sudden Outbreak. The late afternoon sun cast shadows across Yonge Dundas Square, painting the bustling heart of Toronto in a warm golden light. Dave adjusted his camera, his eyes sparkling with excitement as he prepared to capture the vibrant energy of the city he loved. "What's up, Toronto explorers?" Dave's voice rang out, filled with enthusiasm. "It's your boy Dave here, coming at you live from the coolest spot in the Sixx, Yonge Dundas Square." He panned the camera around, showcasing the iconic billboards and the diverse crowd milling about. As he walked through the square, Dave's charisma shone through. "Check out this awesome street performer," he exclaimed, focusing on a mime entertaining a small gathering. "Man, I never get tired of the incredible talent in this city. Don't forget to drop a like if you're loving the vibe." Dave continued his tour, pointing out the latest movie posters plastered across the Cineplex facade and the mouth-watering aromas wafting from nearby food trucks. His commentary was peppered with inside jokes and playful banter, a testament to the rapport he'd built with his audience over countless vlogs. "Oh, and for those of you asking about my favorite food spot," Dave winked at the camera, "you know I can't reveal all my secrets. But stick around, and maybe we'll grab a bite later. The night is young, and Toronto's just getting started." As Dave made his way towards the busy intersection of Yonge and Dundas, a commotion near the crosswalk caught his attention. His brow furrowed as he zoomed in on a heated argument between two men. "Whoa, looks like we've got some drama unfolding here, folks," Dave narrated, his tone a mix of curiosity and concern. "Let's hope everyone keeps it cool." His words were cut short as one of the men lunged at the other, teeth bared in a feral snarl. The attacked man screamed in pain and shock as his assailant bit into his shoulder and neck, drawing blood. "Holy sh!" Dave quickly censored himself, remembering his younger viewers. "What the heck is going on?" The square erupted into chaos. People scattered, their shouts of confusion and fear drowning out the usual urban cacophony. Dave's hand trembled slightly as he kept filming, his instinct as a vlogger overriding his growing sense of unease. "Guys, I don't know what's happening, but it's getting pretty intense here," Dave said, his voice losing its usual playful edge. "Maybe it's some kind of performance art gone wrong." But as he panned the camera around, it became clear that this was no act. More altercations were breaking out across the square. People were attacking each other with a savage intensity that sent chills down Dave's spine. "Oh my God," he whispered, the reality of the situation finally sinking in. "This is real. This is actually happening." A woman staggered past Dave, her eyes glazed and unfocused. Blood trickled from a wound on her neck, staining her once pristine white blouse. As she turned towards him, Dave's breath caught in his throat. Her face was contorted in a grotesque mask of hunger. Her eyes became glazed over and her movements became jerky and unnatural. "Stay back!" Dave shouted, backing away from the approaching woman. His heart raced as he realized the gravity of the situation. This wasn't just a riot or a mass brawl. Something was fundamentally wrong with these people. The woman ran towards Dave, her hands grasping at his clothes. He stumbled backward, nearly losing his footing on the uneven pavement. In a moment of quick thinking, he swung his camera bag at her, catching her in the head and knocking her off balance. "I'm so sorry," a mix of guilt and fear washing over him. But there was no time for remorse. All around him, the square had devolved into a nightmarish scene of violence and terror. Dave's mind raced as he tried to make sense of what he was seeing. The way people were attacking each other, the mindless aggression, the biting, it all seemed horrifyingly familiar, like something out of a zombie movie. But this was real life, not some late-night horror flick. "Guys, I don't know if you're still watching, but if you are, stay inside," Dave said, his voice shaking as he addressed his audience. "Something is very wrong in downtown Toronto. These people, they're not themselves. They're attacking anyone they can get their hands on." As he spoke, Dave began moving towards the edge of the square, his eyes darting around for a safe path through the chaos. He needed to get out of there, to find somewhere secure where he could gather his thoughts and figure out what to do next. A piercing scream cut through the air, and Dave whirled around to see a young woman being pulled to the ground by three of the infected individuals. His stomach churned as he watched them tear into her flesh, their inhuman growls mixing with her agonized cries. "No, no, no," Dave muttered, tears welling up in his eyes. He wanted to help, to do something, anything, but he knew it was too late. The realization of his own helplessness in the face of this madness hit him like a punch to the gut. Forcing himself to look away from the gruesome scene, Dave spotted a gap in the crowd. Without hesitation, he bolted, weaving between panicked bystanders and the increasingly numerous infected. "I'm heading for my car," he panted into the camera, which he still held tightly in his hand. "It's parked on Queen Street. If I can just make it there, maybe I can." His words were cut short as an infected man suddenly appeared in front of him, arms outstretched and mouth agape. Dave's reflexes kicked in, and he ducked under the man's grasp, using his momentum to push past. "That was too close," Dave gasped, his heart pounding in his chest. He could hear the infected man's snarls behind him, spurring him to run faster. As he neared the edge of the square, Dave's mind raced with questions. What was causing this? How far had it spread? Were his friends and family safe? The weight of uncertainty pressed down on him, threatening to overwhelm his resolve. But Dave pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on the immediate goal of reaching his car. He'd always prided himself on his ability to think on his feet, to find the interesting angle in any situation. Now, those skills were being put to the ultimate test. "Okay, Toronto explorers," Dave said, trying to inject a note of calm into his voice despite the chaos around him. "This is definitely not the kind of urban adventure I had in mind for today's vlog, but we're going to get through this together." He turned onto Queen Street, relief washing over him as he spotted his car parked a short distance away. As Dave fumbled for his keys, a group of infected rounded the corner behind him. Their guttural moans sent a fresh wave of fear through him, spurring him to move faster. Come on," he muttered, finally managing to unlock the car. He yanked the door open and threw himself inside, slamming it shut just as the first of the infected reached him. Hands pounded on the windows, faces pressed against the glass, contorted in mindless rage. Dave's fingers trembled as he struggled to get the key into the ignition. Please start," he pleaded, turning the key. The engine sputtered once, twice, before roaring to life. "Yes!" Dave threw the car into gear and hit the gas, tires screeching as he pulled away from the curb. The infected stumbled after him, but quickly fell behind as he accelerated down the street. As the immediate danger passed, Dave let out a shaky breath. He glanced at his camera, which he'd hastily placed on the passenger seat. I made it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what's going on out there, but it's bad. Really bad." He navigated through the increasingly chaotic streets, dodging abandoned vehicles and fleeing pedestrians. The city he knew and loved was transforming before his eyes into something nightmarish and unrecognizable. "Listen, if anyone's still watching this stream, please stay safe," Dave urged, glancing between the road and the camera. "Find somewhere secure and barricade yourself in. Don't try to reason with these people. They're not themselves anymore." As he drove, Dave's mind raced with possibilities. Where should he go? What should he do? The weight of the situation pressed down on him, threatening to crush his usually optimistic spirit. But then a thought occurred to him. He was still broadcasting, still connected to his audience, however tenuous that connection might be. In this moment of crisis, maybe he could do more than just save himself. "Okay, Toronto explorers," Dave said, a new determination creeping into his voice. "I don't know how long I'll be able to keep this stream going, but as long as I can, I'm going to document what's happening. Maybe it can help someone else survive this madness." He took a deep breath, steeling himself for whatever lay ahead. So buckle up, folks. This is going to be the craziest urban exploration we've ever done. And remember, no matter how dark things get, we're in this together. As Dave navigated through the increasingly treacherous streets of Toronto, the reality of his new role began to sink in. He was no longer just a carefree vlogger capturing the city's vibrant life. In the span of mere minutes, he had become a chronicler of its potential downfall, and perhaps a beacon of hope for those still watching. The sun continued its descent, casting shadows across the once familiar cityscape. As darkness began to fall, Dave gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. He knew that the night ahead would be long and fraught with danger. But for now, he was alive, he was mobile, and he had a purpose. Chapter 2. Panic on the Streets. Dave's knuckles were white as he gripped the steering wheel of his G-Wagon, his eyes darting between the road ahead and the rearview mirror. The infected were still visible, running after his car with relentless assault, then getting distracted by any moving, breathing, living being. His heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline from his narrow escape still coursing through his veins. "Okay, Toronto explorers," Dave said, his voice shaky as he addressed his camera propped on the dashboard. We're on the move now. I don't know how many of you are still watching, but if you are, please stay safe. This is real. This is happening." As he navigated through the increasingly chaotic streets, Dave's mind raced. The familiar cityscape of Toronto had transformed into a nightmarish version of itself in a matter of minutes. Abandoned cars littered the roads, their doors left open, car windows broken out, blood splattered on most of the cars. Screams and the sound of breaking glass echoed in the distance. "I'm going to try to make it to the police station," Dave announced, more to calm himself than for his viewers. "Maybe they'll have some answers, or at least some kind of plan." He turned onto Queen Street, heading west towards the nearest police precinct. As he approached University Avenue, he saw the first signs of an official response. A makeshift police barricade blocked the intersection, officers in riot gear struggling to maintain order as a crowd of panicked citizens pressed against them. Dave slowed his car, rolling down the window to call out to one of the officers. "Hey, what's going on? What should we do?" The officer turned, his face a mask of stress and confusion. "Sir, please return to your home and lock all doors and windows. We're working to contain the situation." Before Dave could ask more questions, a commotion erupted at the edge of the crowd. Several infected individuals had pushed their way through, their inhuman snarls rising above the din of panicked voices. The police line broke as officers scrambled to defend themselves and the civilians. "Oh God," Dave whispered, his camera capturing the chaos unfolding before him. "They're here too. The police, they can't stop them." He quickly rolled up his window and accelerated, swerving around the barricade and onto University Avenue. As he drove, he narrated the scene for his viewers, his voice growing more urgent with each passing moment. "The streets are a mess, guys. There are abandoned cars everywhere, people running. I just passed an overturned bus. It's like something out of a disaster movie, but it's real. It's all real." Dave's live stream comments were flooding in faster than he could read them. Viewers from around the world were watching in horror as the situation in Toronto unfolded. Some were saying it's here in the USA, it's here in Chicago, here in Roseburg, here in London, here in Vegas. The comments section flooded with people reporting the same virus from around the world. "I'm trying to read your comments, but there's so many," Dave said, glancing at his phone. "For those asking, I don't know how far this has spread. It seems to be all over downtown at least. If you're in Toronto, stay inside. Don't try to leave. It's too dangerous out here." As he approached College Street, Dave saw another police barricade, this one more heavily fortified. Armed officers were directing traffic, trying to establish some semblance of order amidst the chaos. Dave pulled over, hoping to get more information. An officer approached his car, her face grim. "Sir, you need to turn around. We're evacuating this area." "Officer, please," Dave pleaded. "I'm live streaming. People need to know what's happening. Can you tell us anything?" The officer hesitated, then leaned closer. "Listen, it's bad. We're losing control. If you can get out of the city, do it. But be careful. These things, they're everywhere." Just then, a series of gunshots rang out, followed by screams. The officer's radio crackled to life with frantic calls for backup. The officer gave Dave one last look before running back to the barricade. "You heard it, folks," Dave said, his voice trembling. It's not good. I'm going to try to find a way out of the city." As Dave pulled away from the barricade, he noticed his fuel gauge was low. "Damn it," he muttered. "I need to find gas, and fast." He spotted a gas station a few blocks away and made a beeline for it. As he approached, he saw a crowd of people fighting over the pumps. Some were filling their cars, while others were filling jerry cans and whatever containers they could find. Dave pulled into the station, his camera capturing the frenzied scene. I don't know if I can get gas here, but I have to try. I won't make it far without it. He got out of his car, clutching his keys and trying to look as non-threatening as possible. As he approached one of the pumps, a man turned to him, brandishing a tire iron. "Back off!" the man shouted. "This pump is mine." Dave raised his hands, backing away slowly. "Whoa, easy there. I'm just trying to get some gas like everyone else." The situation was escalating quickly. People were shoving each other, voices rising in anger and fear. Dave's heart raced as he realized how quickly civility had broken down. Suddenly, a scream pierced the air. Everyone turned to see an infected person stumbling into the gas station, its eyes wild and unfocused. Lower jaw hanging, swinging back and forth as the infected person made its way to the gas station. Panic erupted as people scrambled to get away, abandoning their cars. "Oh no, no, no," Dave muttered, sprinting back to his car. He jumped in and started the engine, his hands shaking as he put it in gear. As he pulled out of the gas station, narrowly avoiding a collision with a fleeing SUV, Dave realized he was running out of options. His fuel was low, the streets were becoming more dangerous by the minute, and he had no clear destination. "Guys, I don't know what to do," he admitted to his viewers, his voice cracking. "I can't get gas. There are no police to help. I need to find another gas station. Fast!" As he drove the city streets heading to the next gas station, Dave read out some of the comments from his live stream. Someone suggesting I try to get to the CN Tower. Another says to head for the airport. Oh, here's an interesting one. The path system. That underground network of tunnels might be safer than the streets, or a death trap. Dave considered his options. The path system could indeed provide shelter and possibly a safer route through the city. But it also meant abandoning his car, his only means of quick escape. As he debated his next move, a group of rioters suddenly appeared in the road ahead of him. They were carrying big-screen TVs, PlayStations, Xboxes, and all the boxes they could carry in their little arms from the electronics store. This forcing Dave to swerve sharply. His car skidded, tires screeching as he fought for control. Time seemed to slow as the vehicle spun, narrowly missing a streetlight before coming to a stop mere inches from a storefront. Dave sat there for a moment, his breath coming in short gasps, his heart pounding in his ears. The camera had fallen to the floor during the near crash, its lens now pointed at the ceiling of the car. I'm okay, Dave finally managed, reaching down to retrieve the camera with shaking hands. That was too close. As he adjusted the camera, Dave noticed something that made his blood run cold. The screen was black, the live stream had cut out. No, he muttered, frantically tapping at his phone, but it was no use. Whether due to the chaos overwhelming the cell networks or damage from the near crash, his connection was gone. The reality of his situation hit Dave like a punch to the gut. He was alone now, truly alone in a city descending into madness. The comforting presence of his viewers, their advice and support, had vanished in an instant. For a moment, Dave sat there, paralyzed by fear and indecision. The sounds of the city in chaos seemed to close in around him, distant screams, shattering glass, and the ever-present moans of the infected. But then, something within Dave stirred. A determination, born from the same spirit that had driven him to explore and share the hidden corners of Toronto with his viewers. He may have lost his connection, but he hadn't lost his purpose. "Okay, Dave," he said to himself, gripping the steering wheel. "You can do this. You're going to survive this, and you're going to help others survive too." With renewed resolve, Dave started the car again, but he had to keep moving. He decided to head towards the financial district, where the entrance to the path system awaited. It was a risk, but staying on the increasingly dangerous streets was an even bigger one. As he drove, Dave continued to narrate, even though he knew no one was watching. It was partly out of habit, partly to keep himself focused and sane in the face of the nightmare unfolding around him. "All right, Toronto explorers," he said, his voice steadier now. "We may have lost our connection, but the chaos continues. We're heading to the path system. It's going to be dark, it's going to be scary, but it might just be our best chance at survival." The streets became more congested as Dave approached the heart of downtown. Abandoned vehicles clogged the roads, forcing him to weave between them carefully. The infected were more numerous here. stumbling aimlessly or chasing after the few fleeing survivors still on the streets. As he turned onto Bay Street, Dave saw something that made his heart sink. A massive pileup blocked the road ahead, a tangle of crushed metal and shattered glass that was impassable, and beyond it, a sea of infected drawn by the commotion. "Well, folks," Dave said, putting the car in park, "looks like this is where we say goodbye to our trusty steed. It's time to continue on foot." He took a deep breath, steeling himself for what was to come. With careful movements, he gathered his backpack, making sure his camera, extra batteries, and the few snacks he had were secure. Then, after one last look around to ensure the coast was clear, he opened the car door and stepped out into the chaos of Toronto's streets. The sounds of the city in crisis were even more overwhelming now that he was on foot. The moans of the infected seemed to come from every direction, mixing with distant screams and the occasional sound of gunfire. The air was thick with smoke from various fires that had broken out across the city. Dave moved quickly but cautiously, keeping to the shadows and ducking behind abandoned cars whenever he spotted movement ahead. His camera was on, recording everything, even though he had no way to share it at the moment. "We're on foot now," he whispered into the camera, "heading for the path entrance near First Canadian Place. It's not far, but in this new world, even a short distance can be a dangerous journey." As he made his way down Bay Street, Dave's urban exploration skills came in handy. He was familiar with the layout of the financial district, knew the shortcuts and hidden alleys that most tourists overlooked. This knowledge might just save his life now. Rounding a corner, Dave came face to face with a scene that stopped him in his tracks. A group of survivors was barricaded in a small convenience store, desperately trying to hold off a horde of infected that clawed at the windows. For a moment, Dave hesitated. Should he try to help? But how? He was just one person, armed with nothing but a camera and his wits. Before he could decide, a hand grabbed his shoulder. Dave whirled around, ready to defend himself, only to find himself face to face with a woman in scrubs, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and determination. "Are you bit?" she demanded, her voice low and urgent. Dave shook his head. "No, I'm not. I'm Dave. I'm trying to get to the path." The woman nodded. "Emily, I'm heading there too. Strength in numbers, right?" As they moved away from the besieged convenience store, Emily explained that she was a nurse who had been working at a nearby clinic when the outbreak hit. She had medical supplies in her bag and knowledge that could prove invaluable. "Listen," Emily said as they approached the entrance to the path system. "Once we're down there, it's going to be dark. We don't know what we'll find. Are you sure you want to do this?" Dave looked at her, then at the chaos of the streets around them. He thought of his viewers, now disconnected but perhaps still out there, still in need of hope and guidance. He thought of the story unfolding around him, a story that needed to be told. "I'm sure," he said, his voice firm. "Whatever's down there, it can't be worse than what's up here. And maybe, just maybe, we'll find others. People we can help." Emily nodded, a hint of a smile on her face. "All right then, Dave the vlogger, let's see what adventures await us underground." With one last look at the city they were leaving behind, Dave and Emily pushed open the doors and descended into the darkness of the path system. As they moved deeper into the underground network, the sounds of the chaos above faded, replaced by an eerie silence. Dave's camera light illuminated the way ahead, casting long shadows in the abandoned corridors. He couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. That danger could be lurking around any corner. But he also felt a glimmer of hope. He wasn't alone anymore. And somewhere in this maze of tunnels, there might be others, survivors who needed help or who could join their small group. "All right, Toronto explorers," Dave whispered into his camera as they ventured deeper into the path. "The live stream might be down, but the story isn't over. Not by a long shot. Stay tuned, because this is one urban exploration that's about to get a whole lot more intense." And with that, Dave and Emily disappeared into the depths of Toronto's underground, leaving behind the infected-filled streets and venturing into an unknown that held both danger and the possibility of salvation. Chapter 3: The Safe Haven. The path system stretched before Dave and Emily like a labyrinth, its dimly lit corridors eerily silent compared to the chaos above. Their footsteps echoed off the tiled floors as they navigated through the underground network, guided by the beam of Dave's camera light. "So Dave the vlogger," Emily whispered, her eyes darting from shadow to shadow. "What's our plan?" Dave paused, considering their options. "We need supplies and somewhere defensible to hole up. Any ideas?" Emily's face lit up. "St. Lawrence Market. It's not far from here, and it's got food, water, and solid doors we can barricade." "Brilliant," Dave nodded, impressed by her quick thinking. "Lead the way, Doc." As they made their way through the path, Dave couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. Every corner, every abandoned storefront seemed to hide potential threats. He kept his camera rolling, narrating in hushed tones. "We're heading to St. Lawrence Market, folks. If anyone's still out there watching this, it might be a good place to rendezvous. Stay safe, stay quiet, and watch each other's backs." After what felt like hours of tense navigation, they finally emerged from the path near St. Lawrence Market. The streets were eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the usual bustle of the area. Abandoned cars littered the road, some with doors still flung open, silent testaments to the panic that had gripped the city. As they approached the market's entrance, a sudden movement caught Dave's eye. He grabbed Emily's arm, pulling her behind a nearby car. "Wait," he whispered, pointing towards the market's main doors. A figure stumbled out, movements jerky and uncoordinated. Dave's heart raced, fearing they'd encountered another infected. But as the person came into view, it became clear they were very much alive, just terrified and exhausted. "Hey!" Dave called out against his better judgment. The person whirled around, eyes wide with fear. "We're not infected. We're here to help." The stranger, a burly man with a day's worth of stubble, hesitated before responding. You're really not infected?" Emily stepped forward, her hands raised in a non-threatening gesture. "We're clean. I'm a nurse. Are you hurt?" The man's shoulders sagged with relief. "Name's Marcus. I've been holed up in there since this morning. Thought I was the only one left." As they cautiously approached Marcus, Dave noticed a young woman peering out from behind the market's doors. "Hey, it's okay," he called out softly. "You can come out. We're all in this together." The woman emerged slowly, her eyes red from crying. "I'm Sarah," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I was just visiting Toronto. I don't know what's happening." Dave felt a pang of sympathy for Sarah. He remembered all too well the terror of those first moments when the world turned upside down. "It's going to be okay," he said, trying to inject confidence into his voice. "We're going to figure this out together." The group made their way into the market, Marcus and Sarah leading them to the makeshift safe haven they'd established in one of the back storage rooms. As they walked, Dave couldn't help but marvel at the surreal scene. The usually bustling market was now a ghost town, its stalls abandoned midday, produce left to rot on counters. "We've got some supplies," Marcus explained as they entered the storage room. "Water, canned goods, some first aid stuff. But we need to be careful. Don't know how long we'll be stuck here." Emily immediately took charge, her nurse's training kicking in. She began sorting through the supplies, taking inventory and checking expiration dates. Dave, meanwhile, set up his camera on a nearby shelf, determined to keep documenting their situation. "All right, Toronto explorers," he said, addressing his non-existent audience. "We found shelter at St. Lawrence Market. We've got food, water, and most importantly, we're not alone anymore. This is Dave, signing off for now. Stay safe out there." As the initial adrenaline of their meeting wore off, the reality of their situation began to sink in. The four survivors gathered around a makeshift table, the weight of their circumstances heavy on their shoulders. "So," Marcus broke the silence, his voice gruff, "what's the plan? We can't stay here forever." Emily looked up from the first aid kit she'd been organizing. "First things first, we need to secure this place. Board up windows, reinforce doors, then we ration our supplies and try to make contact with any authorities still out there." Dave nodded, impressed by Emily's level-headedness. "I can help with the barricades. I've done some urban exploration, so I know a thing or two about navigating tight spaces and securing entrances." Sarah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. I can help with the food. I worked in a restaurant back home. I know how to make supplies last." As they discussed their plans, a sense of cautious optimism began to grow. They had shelter, supplies, and each other. For the first time since the outbreak began, Dave felt a glimmer of hope. But as the days wore on, that hope began to fray at the edges. The constant fear of discovery by the infected, the dwindling supplies, and the close quarters began to take their toll on the group's morale. Tensions came to a head on the 5th day. Dave was filming a supply inventory when he overheard Marcus and Emily arguing in hushed tones. "We need to go on a supply run," Marcus insisted. "We're running low on everything." Emily shook her head firmly. "It's too dangerous. We don't know what's out there." "Exactly." Marcus's voice rose slightly. "We don't know. For all we know, help could be just around the corner, but we'll never find out if we stay cooped up in here." Dave lowered his camera, sensing the growing tension. He glanced at Sarah, who was pretending to be engrossed in a can of beans, clearly uncomfortable with the conflict. "Hey guys," Dave interjected, trying to keep his tone light. "Why don't we take a vote? Democracy in action, right?" Marcus scoffed. "This isn't a game, vlogger boy. This is life or death." "I know that," Dave replied, his own frustration beginning to show. "But we need to work together. We're all we've got right now." The argument might have escalated further if not for a sudden noise from outside. A crash followed by an all-too-familiar moan. Everyone froze, eyes wide with fear. "They found us," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Dave rushed to the barricaded window, peering through a small gap. His heart sank at what he saw. A horde of infected, at least 24 strong, was converging on the market. "We need to move," he said, his voice urgent. "Now." The group sprang into action, grabbing what supplies they could carry. Dave slung his backpack over his shoulder, making sure his camera was secure. As they prepared to leave, he couldn't help but feel a twinge of regret. This place had been their safe haven, however briefly. Just as they were about to make their escape, another crash echoed through the market. This one closer, more immediate. The infected had breached the outer defenses. "Run!" Marcus shouted, throwing open the back door. They burst out into the alley behind the market, the sounds of the horde close behind them. Dave's heart pounded in his chest as they ran, the weight of his backpack and camera suddenly feeling like a ton of bricks. As they rounded a corner, Dave risked a glance back. The sight chilled him to his core. The infected were pouring out of the market, their lifeless eyes fixed on the fleeing survivors. "This way," Emily called out, pointing towards a narrow side street. They followed her lead, weaving through abandoned cars and debris. The moans of the infected seemed to come from every direction, growing louder with each passing moment. Dave's lungs burned as he ran, but he forced himself to keep going. He could hear Sarah's panicked breathing beside him, see Marcus's determined stride ahead. They were in this together now, for better or worse. As they emerged onto a wider street, Dave spotted a glimmer of hope. An abandoned bus, its doors hanging open, sat just a few yards away. "The bus!" he shouted, pointing. "We can use it to escape." Without hesitation, the group made a beeline for the vehicle. Marcus reached it first, quickly checking inside before waving the others on. "It's clear. Get in." Dave helped Sarah up the steps, then turned to make sure Emily was close behind. As the nurse climbed aboard, Dave heard a blood-curdling screech. One of the infected, faster than the others, was closing in fast. In a split-second decision, Dave swung his backpack, catching the infected square in the face. The creature stumbled back, giving Dave just enough time to scramble onto the bus. "Go! Go! Go!" he yelled to Marcus, who had already positioned himself in the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, and the bus lurched forward just as the horde reached them. Infected hands clawed at the windows, leaving bloody streaks on the glass. As they sped away from the market, leaving behind their short-lived safe haven, Dave slumped into a seat, his heart still racing. He looked around at his companions, Emily tending to a cut on Sarah's arm, Marcus focused intently on the road ahead. With shaking hands, Dave raised his camera, determined to capture this moment. "Well, Toronto explorers," he said, his voice hoarse from exertion, "looks like we're on the move again. St. Lawrence Market is no longer safe, but we're alive, and we're together. Where we're headed, I don't know. But one thing's for sure. This adventure is far from over." As the bus weaved through the abandoned streets of Toronto, leaving behind the chaos at St. Lawrence Market, Dave couldn't help but wonder what challenges lay ahead. Their safe haven had been compromised, their trust in each other tested, but they had survived, and in this new world, that was no small feat. The city skyline loomed ahead, a mix of familiar landmarks and ominous shadows. Whatever came next, Dave knew one thing for certain. Their journey through this apocalyptic Toronto was only just beginning. Chapter 4. An Impossible Escape. The bus rumbled through the eerily quiet streets of Toronto, its passengers still catching their breath from the narrow escape at St. Lawrence Market. Dave, his camera clutched tightly in his hands, panned across the faces of his fellow survivors. Emily sat rigidly in her seat, her eyes scanning the passing buildings for any signs of danger. Marcus, at the wheel, gripped the steering column with white-knuckled intensity. Sarah huddled in the back, her arms wrapped tightly around herself, eyes wide with fear. "All right, Toronto explorers," Dave spoke softly into his camera, his voice hoarse from the earlier exertion. "We've just had to abandon our temporary safe haven at St. Lawrence Market. The infected, they found us. The infected overtook our hideout, and we all got out just in time. But we're still here, still fighting." As the bus rolled down Front Street, the group found themselves face to face with the stark reality of their new world. The once bustling financial district now stood as a silent monument to the chaos that had engulfed the city. Abandoned cars, looted goods from nearby stores, dead bodies littered the streets. Papers fluttered in the wind, a surreal snowfall of stock reports and corporate memos. "We need a new plan," Emily said, breaking the tense silence. "We can't just keep driving aimlessly." Marcus grunted in agreement. "Yeah, but where? This whole damn city's overrun." Dave lowered his camera, his mind racing. "What about the distillery district? It's not far from here, and those old buildings might be easier to secure than modern ones." Sarah perked up at the suggestion. "I remember reading about that place in my guidebook. Lots of narrow streets and sturdy brick buildings, right?" Emily nodded slowly. "It's worth a shot. At the very least, it might buy us some time to regroup and figure out our next move." With a destination in mind, Marcus steered the bus towards the historic district. As they approached, the modern glass and steel of the financial district gave way to the weathered brick and cobblestone streets of the distillery. The usually charming and quaint area now took on a more ominous air, its empty pedestrian walkways echoing with an eerie silence. Dave raised his camera again, capturing the haunting beauty of the deserted district. "We're entering the distillery district now, folks. Once a hot spot for tourists and locals alike. Now it's just us and the ghosts of Toronto's past." As Marcus maneuvered the bus through the narrow streets, a sudden movement caught Dave's eye. He zoomed in, his heart racing as he spotted a figure stumbling out from behind an old whiskey barrel. "Marcus, stop!" Dave shouted. "Infected, 2:00. The bus screeched to a halt, the group holding their breath as they watched the lone infected shamble across their path. It paused for a moment, its insides now dragging on the ground, its milky eyes seeming to stare directly at them. The infected started to walk towards the bus. Marcus hit the gas and with a thump ran over the infected, while David recorded every second. Emily stood up, her face set with determination. "We can't stay in this bus. It's too conspicuous, and we're sitting ducks if a horde comes through." Marcus nodded in agreement. "All right, let's find somewhere to hole up. Any ideas?" Dave scanned the area, his urban explorer instincts kicking in. "There," he said, pointing to a sturdy-looking brick building with a faded stone distillery sign. "That place looks defensible, and it might have some supplies left over." The group cautiously exited the bus, each person clutching whatever makeshift weapons they had managed to scavenge. Dave kept his camera rolling, documenting their tense journey across the cobblestone street. As they approached the old distillery, a low moan echoed from a nearby alleyway. The group froze, eyes wide with fear. Marcus raised a hand, signaling for silence, as he crept towards the source of the sound. Suddenly, 2 infected burst from the alley, their faces contorted in mindless hunger. Marcus swung the pipe he had been carrying, catching one squarely in the head. Crack! The sound as the pipe landed square on the skull, but bashing a skull in was a lot harder than the movies and Audible books made it out to be. Marcus then swung again. Snap, crackle, pop! Marcus bashed in the back of the skull. It was a lot easier smashing the back of the skull than the front. The infected crumpled to the ground, but the other lunged forward, its rotting hands grasping at Marcus's jacket. "Marcus!" Emily shouted, rushing forward with a broken bottle. She plunged it into the infected's neck, black blood oozing from the wound. The infected did not budge. It turned and started towards Emily. Emily fell backward, tripping over her own 2 feet. The infected got on top of her, its teeth snapping at her face. With one solid swing, Marcus landed the pipe square on the back of the head. The infected skull, breaking and cracking, the infected fell on top of Emily, blood oozing all over her face. Marcus rolled the infected off of her, helped her up, and asked, "Are you okay?" Dave captured the entire encounter on camera, his hands shaking slightly as he zoomed in on the fallen infected. "Holy shit," he muttered. "That was intense." Sarah retched in the background, the violence proving too much for her. Emily quickly moved to comfort her, cleaning her face and neck while Marcus stood over the bodies, his chest heaving. "We need to move," he growled. "Now." The group hurried into the stone distillery, barricading the door behind them with whatever furniture they could find. As the adrenaline of the encounter began to wear off, the reality of their situation sank in. Dave panned his camera around the dusty interior of the old building. Massive copper stills loomed in the shadows, silent sentinels to their plight. "Well, Toronto explorers," he said, his voice low, "looks like we've found our new temporary home. Let's hope it's more permanent than the last one." As the group began to explore their new shelter, tensions that had been simmering since their escape from St. Lawrence Market began to boil over. "We need to take stock of our supplies," Emily said, her nurse's instincts kicking in. "Food, water, medical supplies, anything we can use." Marcus scoffed. "What we need is weapons. You saw what happened out there. We can't defend ourselves with bottles and pipes forever." "And what exactly do you suggest?" Emily shot back. "We raid a police station? In case you haven't noticed, the city's crawling with those things." Dave stepped between them, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Hey, let's all take a breath here. We're all stressed, but fighting amongst ourselves isn't going to help anyone." Emily sighed, running a hand through her disheveled hair. "I'm managing. It's just, I became a nurse to save lives, you know? And now—" She trailed off, her eyes distant. Dave reached out, placing a comforting hand on her shoulder. "Hey, you're still saving lives. You're keeping us alive, keeping us sane. That counts for something." A small smile tugged at Emily's lips. "Thanks, Dave. I just hope it's enough." Their moment was interrupted by a shout from Marcus. "Guys, you need to see this." Dave and Emily rushed to the back room, where Marcus and Sarah stood before a dusty old radio set. "Think we can get this working?" Marcus asked, a glimmer of hope in his eyes. Dave examined the radio, his mind racing with possibilities. "If we can find some batteries, maybe. It might be our best shot at finding out what's happening in the rest of the city. Or the world." As the group worked to get the radio operational, Dave couldn't help but feel a sense of purpose returning. They had shelter, potential weapons, and now a possible link to the outside world. It wasn't much, but it was a start. Hours passed as they fortified their new base, turning the old distillery into a makeshift fortress. Dave continued to film, capturing their efforts and the growing camaraderie between the survivors. As night fell, the group gathered around a small fire they had built in one of the old copper stills. The dancing flames cast long shadows across the brick walls, creating an almost cozy atmosphere despite their dire circumstances. "So," Dave said, breaking the comfortable silence, "I think it's time we address the elephant in the room. What's our long-term plan here?" The question hung in the air, heavy with implications. Emily was the first to respond. "We need to find a way out of the city. Toronto's lost. We need to find somewhere less populated, somewhere we can start over." Marcus nodded in agreement. "The countryside might be safer. Less people means less of those things." Sarah hugged her knees to her chest. "But what if there's nowhere safe left? What if the whole world is like this now?" The group fell silent, the weight of Sarah's words sinking in. Dave raised his camera, capturing their somber expressions. "We can't think like that," he said firmly. "There has to be hope. Otherwise, what are we fighting for?" As if in response to Dave's words, the radio they had been tinkering with suddenly crackled to life. Static filled the air, punctuated by brief snippets of a voice. "Emergency broadcast. Survivors. CN Tower." The group scrambled to adjust the radio, desperate to hear more. But as quickly as it had come, the signal faded, leaving them once again in silence. Dave looked around at his companions, seeing a mix of hope and fear in their eyes. "Well, folks," he said, a hint of his old enthusiasm creeping into his voice, "looks like we might have our next destination. The CN Tower awaits." As the group settled in for the night, taking turns to keep watch, Dave found a quiet corner to record one last message. "Toronto explorers," he whispered into his camera, "we've made it through another day. Tomorrow, we set our sights on the CN Tower. It's going to be dangerous, maybe even impossible, but we have to try, because in this new world, hope might be the most precious resource of all." With that, Dave turned off his camera and leaned back against the cold brick wall. Outside, the infected roamed the streets of the once vibrant city. But inside this old distillery, a small flame of hope burned on, fueled by the determination of 4 unlikely survivors. Chapter 5. Trapped in the Tower. The bus groaned to a halt in front of the CN Tower, its engine sputtering out like a final exhausted breath. Dave panned his camera across the towering concrete facade, now a silent monolith in the chaos-stricken city. "Well, Toronto explorers," he whispered into the lens, "we've made it to downtown Toronto. The CN Tower once held the record of the tallest freestanding structure on land for over 30 years. Now, well, let's hope it's our ticket to survival." The group disembarked cautiously, eyes darting in all directions for any sign of the infected. The usually bustling plaza was eerily empty, save for scattered debris and abandoned briefcases, grim testaments to the panic that had gripped the city's workforce. Marcus took point, his improvised weapon, a fire axe liberated from the distillery district, held at the ready. Emily followed close behind, her nurse's bag slung over her shoulder, while Sarah brought up the rear, clutching a crowbar with white-knuckled intensity. As they approached the main entrance, Dave couldn't help but marvel at the surreal scene. "It's like something out of a post-apocalyptic movie," he murmured, zooming in on the shattered revolving door. "Except this is real. This is our lives now." Marcus grunted, testing the door. "Locked. We'll have to find another way in." Emily pointed to a side entrance. "There. Service access. It might be easier to secure from the inside, too." The group made their way to the smaller door, Sarah keeping watch while Marcus and Emily worked to pry it open. Dave kept filming, his urban explorer instincts kicking in as he narrated their progress. "All right, folks, we're about to enter one of Toronto's tallest structures. In normal times, you'd need special clearance to get behind the scenes like this. But these aren't normal times, are they?" With a final heave, the door creaked open. The group slipped inside, quickly barricading the entrance behind them with whatever they could find. Chairs, tables, even a potted plant that had somehow survived the chaos. The interior of the CN Tower was a stark contrast to the world outside. Polished marble floors stretched out before them, leading to a bank of elevators that now stood silent and dark. The air was thick with dust and an oppressive silence that seemed to press in from all sides. As they made their way deeper into the building, Dave couldn't shake a growing sense of unease. The pristine environment, now abandoned and empty of life, felt almost as alien as the zombie-infested streets outside. "It's like we're the last people on Earth," Sarah whispered, voicing the thought that had been nagging at all of them. Dave turned his camera to her, capturing the mix of fear and wonder on her face. "Not the last, Sarah. Just the last in this part of the city. There have to be other survivors out there. We just need to find them." They decided to set up camp in the Tower restaurant, which housed a large dining area and a well-stocked break room and kitchen. As they secured the stairwell access and used chairs to stop the elevator doors from closing, they began to settle in. The adrenaline of their journey began to wear off, replaced by a bone-deep wariness. Dave found a quiet corner to record his thoughts. "Day, I don't even know anymore," he said softly into the camera. "We've found shelter in the CN Tower. It's secure for now at least, but I can't help wondering, how long can we stay here? How long before we run out of food, or water, or hope?" As night fell, the group gathered in what had once been the main dining area, now transformed into their makeshift command center. Maps of the city were spread out on the mahogany desk, lit by the warm glow of battery-powered lanterns. Sarah, who had been quiet throughout most of the day, suddenly spoke up, What about food? How long can we last on what we found here? Her question brought a sobering silence to the room. They had scavenged what they could from the kitchen and vending machines, but it wouldn't last forever. We'll need to make supply runs, Dave said, lowering his camera. But we should wait a few days, let things calm down out there, if they ever do. As the others nodded in reluctant agreement, Dave couldn't shake the feeling that their problems were just beginning. The tower might offer temporary safety, but it was also a potential trap. One wrong move, and they could find themselves cornered with nowhere to run. The next few days passed in a blur of fortification and exploration. They secured as much of the building as they could, setting up makeshift traps on the lower floors. Dave documented their efforts, his camera a constant presence as they transformed the corporate tower into a post-apocalyptic fortress. But as the initial burst of activity faded, the reality of their situation began to sink in. Trapped in the tower, with dwindling supplies and no clear plan for the future, fear and mistrust began to grow among the survivors. Dave noticed it first in the little things, sideways glances, hushed conversations that stopped when he approached. He tried to keep his spirits up, using his vlogging skills to create a sense of normalcy, but even he could feel the strain. On the 5th day of their confinement, things came to a head. Dave was filming a tour of their fortifications when he heard raised voices coming from the break room. He rushed in to find Marcus and Emily in a heated argument. "We can't just sit here waiting to die," Emily shouted, her face flushed with anger. Marcus loomed over her, his fists clenched. "And we can't just rush out there half-cocked? You want to get us all killed?" Dave stepped between them, his camera forgotten at his side. Hey, what's going on here?" Emily turned to him, her eyes blazing. "Tell him, Dave. Tell him we need to make a move and find other survivors. We can't be the only ones left." "And risk everything we've built here?" Marcus countered. "This place is secure. We have food and water. Out there, it's a death sentence." Dave looked between them, feeling the weight of their expectations. He opened his mouth to respond, but before he could, a sound froze the blood in his veins. A moan, distant but unmistakable. And it was coming from inside the building. "Oh God," Sarah whimpered. "They're here. They've found us." The argument was forgotten, and the group sprang into action. Marcus grabbed his axe, while Emily snatched up her makeshift first aid kit. Dave's hands shook as he raised his camera, determined to document whatever came next. They moved cautiously through the floor, following the sound. As they rounded a corner, they saw it. A lone infected, stumbling aimlessly through what had once been a cubicle farm for the office staff. "How did it get in?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. Dave's stomach dropped as realization hit him. He remembered filming near one of the emergency exits earlier, distracted by his narration. Had he forgotten to secure the door properly? Before he could voice his suspicion, Marcus stepped forward, axe raised. "I've got this," he growled. But as he approached, the infected turned, its milky eyes locking onto the group. It let out a blood-curdling shriek that echoed through the empty offices. "Run!" Emily shouted, grabbing Sarah's arm and pulling her towards the stairwell. They fled, the sound of more moans coming from the office area. Dave's heart pounded as he realized the horrible truth. Where there was one, there would be more. Their sanctuary had been breached. As they burst into the stairwell, Dave turned to the camera one last time. "Toronto explorers," he panted. "If anyone's still out there watching, the CN Tower has fallen. We're on the move again. Stay safe, stay alive, and don't give up hope." With that, he tucked the camera away and joined the others in their desperate flight through the lobby towards the front doors. The moans of the infected echoed behind them, a grim reminder that in this new world, no place was truly safe. Chapter 6, Out on the Lake. The group stumbled out of the CN Tower, their breaths coming in ragged gasps as they emerged into the eerie silence of Toronto's once bustling downtown district. Dave's camera, still clutched tightly in his hand, captured the haunting scene of abandoned skyscrapers looming over them like silent sentinels. "We need to get out of here," Marcus growled, his eyes darting between the towering buildings. "This place is a death trap." Emily nodded, her face etched with exhaustion and fear. "Agreed. But where do we go? Nowhere seems safe anymore." Dave panned his camera across the desolate street, his mind racing. Suddenly, an idea struck him. "The harbor front," he said, his voice filled with renewed hope. "We could find a boat, get out on the lake. It might be safer than staying in the city." Sarah's eyes lit up at the suggestion. "That's brilliant, Dave. The zombies can't swim, right?" Marcus grunted in agreement. "It's as good a plan as any. Let's move." As they made their way south towards Lake Ontario, Dave couldn't help but marvel at how quickly the city had descended into chaos. The streets were littered with abandoned cars and debris, silent testaments to the panic that had gripped Toronto. He kept his camera rolling, documenting their journey through the post-apocalyptic landscape. "Toronto explorers," Dave whispered into the lens, "we're heading to the harbor front. If anyone's still out there watching, maybe the water is our best bet for safety. Stay tuned." The group moved cautiously, keeping to the shadows and ducking behind abandoned vehicles whenever they heard the telltale moans of the infected. As they neared the waterfront, the familiar skyline of the CN Tower loomed behind, a bittersweet reminder of the city they once knew. Suddenly, Marcus held up a hand, signaling the others to stop. "Look," he hissed, pointing towards a small group of people huddled near a cluster of boats. Dave zoomed in with his camera, his heart racing. "Other survivors," he whispered. "Should we approach them?" Emily hesitated, her eyes narrowing as she assessed the situation. "We don't know if they're friendly. Let's observe for a bit before making contact." The group crouched behind an overturned hot dog cart, watching the other survivors. There were 5 of them, 3 men and 2 women, all armed with makeshift weapons. They seemed to be arguing over something, their voices carrying faintly on the wind. "We can't just leave them behind," one of the women was saying, her voice filled with anguish. "We don't have a choice," a burly man replied, his tone harsh. "There's not enough room on the boat for everyone. Some of us have to stay behind." Dave felt a chill run down his spine as he realized the implications of their conversation. These people were planning to abandon some of their own people. "We should help them," Sarah whispered, her eyes wide with concern. Marcus shook his head firmly. "No way. We don't know these people. For all we know, they could turn on us the moment we show ourselves." As the debate raged on, Dave noticed movement out of the corner of his eye. A small horde of infected was shambling towards the docks, drawn by the sound of the arguing survivors. "Guys," Dave hissed urgently, "we've got company." The others turned to look, their faces paling at the sight of the approaching zombies. Emily made a split-second decision. "We have to warn them," she said, already moving towards the other group. Before anyone could stop her, Emily stepped out from behind their cover. "Hey!" she shouted, waving her arms. "Behind you, zombies!" The other survivors whirled around, their eyes widening in fear as they spotted the horde. In the chaos that ensued, Dave and the others had no choice but to reveal themselves. The strangers joined in a desperate scramble toward the nearest boat. "Get to the boat!" Marcus roared, swinging his axe at an infected that lunged towards them. Dave's camera captured the frantic scene as they all piled onto a small yacht, Marcus and one of the other men working to untie the mooring lines. The engine sputtered to life just as the first of the infected reached the dock. As they pulled away from the shore, Dave turned his camera to capture the receding skyline of Toronto. The city that had once been his home now looked alien and hostile, teeming with the undead. "We made it," Sarah breathed, her voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. But their relief was short-lived. As the adrenaline of their escape began to fade, the reality of their situation set in. They were now trapped on a small boat with a group of strangers, their supplies limited, and their future uncertain. The burly man who had been arguing earlier approached Dave, his eyes narrowing as he spotted the camera. "Turn that thing off," he growled. "We don't need any evidence of what happened back there." Dave lowered the camera but didn't turn it off. "Look," he said, trying to keep his voice calm, "we're all in this together now. We should introduce ourselves, figure out what supplies we have, and come up with a plan." The man glared at Dave for a moment before nodding grudgingly. "Fine, I'm Jack. That's my wife, Lisa," he said, pointing to the woman who had been arguing for not leaving anyone behind. "The others are Tom, Rachel, and Mike." As introductions were made, Emily took charge, her nurse's training kicking in. "We need to take inventory of our supplies and check if anyone's injured," she said, her tone brooking no argument. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity as they sorted through their meager supplies and tended to minor injuries. Dave kept his camera rolling, documenting their efforts and the tense conversations that flowed around him. As night fell, the group gathered on the deck of the yacht, the lights of Toronto twinkling in the distance like a mirage. The mood was somber as they discussed their options. "We can't stay on this boat forever," Jack said, his voice gruff. "We need to find somewhere to make landfall, somewhere safe." Marcus nodded in agreement. "Maybe we could try one of the smaller towns along the lake shore. Might be less infected there." As the discussion continued, Dave noticed Sarah standing alone at the bow of the boat, her eyes fixed on the distant shore. He approached her, camera in hand. "How are you holding up?" he asked softly. Sarah turned to him, her eyes glistening with unshed tears. "I keep thinking about my family back home," she whispered. Do you think they're okay?" Dave felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to reassure her, to tell her that everything would be all right, but he couldn't bring himself to lie. Instead, he put an arm around her shoulders, offering what comfort he could. "I don't know, Sarah," he said honestly. "But we can't give up hope. That's all we have left now." As they stood there, watching the dark waters of Lake Ontario lap against the side of the boat, Dave couldn't shake the feeling that their journey was far from over. The lake might offer temporary refuge, but the infected were still out there, waiting. And with supplies dwindling and tensions rising among the survivors, he knew that the challenges ahead would test them in ways they couldn't even imagine. "Toronto explorers," Dave whispered into his camera, careful not to disturb the others. "We've made it to the lake, but the question remains, how long can we survive out here? And what horrors await us when we inevitably have to return to shore?" As if in answer to his unspoken fears, a distant moan carried across the water, a chilling reminder that in this new world, nowhere was truly safe. Dave tightened his grip on the camera, determined to continue documenting their struggle for survival, no matter what came next. The night wore on, and the survivors took turns keeping watch. Dave found himself unable to sleep, his mind racing with thoughts of what they might face in the coming days. He sat at the stern of the boat, his camera beside him, watching the faint outline of Toronto's skyline fade into the darkness. As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the lake, Jack approached Dave, his face grim. "We've got a problem," he said, his voice low. "We're almost out of fuel. We need to make landfall soon, or we'll be stranded out here." Dave's stomach dropped at the news. He knew that returning to shore meant facing the infected once again, but they had no choice. He nodded, getting to his feet. "I'll wake the others," he said. "We need to come up with a plan." As the group gathered to discuss their options, the tension was thick. The temporary safety of the lake was coming to an end, and they all knew that the challenges ahead would be even greater than those they had already faced. Chapter 7: Survival of the Fittest. The gentle lapping of waves against the hull of their stolen yacht did little to soothe Dave's frayed nerves as he peered through the early morning mist, searching for any sign of land. The Toronto Islands loomed ahead, a dark silhouette against the pale sky, promising sanctuary but harboring unknown dangers. "There," Marcus called out, pointing towards a dilapidated dock jutting out from the shoreline. "We can make landfall there." As Jack maneuvered the boat towards the dock, Dave raised his camera, capturing the eerie stillness of the island. The usual bustle of ferry traffic and excited tourists had been replaced by an oppressive silence, broken only by the occasional cry of a seagull. "Toronto explorers," Dave whispered into the lens, his voice hoarse from lack of sleep. "We've reached the Toronto Islands. Once a paradise of picnics and summer fun, now, well, we're about to find out." The group disembarked cautiously, weapons at the ready. Emily helped Sarah onto the creaking wood of the dock, while Marcus and Jack secured the boat. Dave panned his camera across the overgrown path leading inland, focusing on the rusted sign that read, "Welcome to Centerville Amusement Park." "An amusement park," Sarah murmured, a hint of her old excitement creeping into her voice. "I always wanted to visit here." Marcus grunted, hefting his axe. "Well, kid, I doubt it's going to be very amusing now. Stay alert." As they made their way towards the park, Dave couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The dense foliage on either side of the path seemed to rustle with more than just the wind, and shadows flitted at the edge of his vision. "Keep your eyes open," Emily warned, her nurse's instincts on high alert. "This place is too quiet." They entered the amusement park, and Dave felt a chill run down his spine. The once cheerful attractions now stood as grotesque parodies of themselves. The carousel horses, their paint peeling and eyes lifeless, seemed to stare accusingly at the intruders. The Ferris wheel creaked ominously in the breeze, its seats swaying like gallows. "We need to find supplies," Jack said, breaking the tense silence. "Food, water, anything useful. Let's split up and search the buildings." Dave's stomach churned at the idea of separating, but he knew they had no choice. Resources were scarce, and they needed to cover more ground. "I'll check the gift shop," he volunteered, raising his camera. "Might find some snacks or bottled water." As the group dispersed, Dave made his way to the dilapidated storefront. The windows were smashed, and faded plush toys lay scattered on the ground like fallen soldiers. He stepped carefully over the broken glass, his camera light illuminating the dusty interior. "Okay, Toronto explorers," Dave narrated softly. "We're in the gift shop of Centerville Amusement Park. Not exactly the souvenir hunting I had in mind for my vlogs, but hey, apocalypse, right?" He rummaged through the shelves, finding a few sealed bags of chips and some warm bottles of water. As he stuffed them into his backpack, a noise from the back room made him freeze. "Hello?" Dave called out, his voice trembling slightly. "Is someone there?" The shuffling sound grew louder, and Dave's heart raced as he realized his mistake. He fumbled for the crowbar he'd been carrying, just as a figure lurched out of the shadows. It had once been a park employee, its tattered uniform still bearing the Centerville logo. Now it was a grotesque mockery of humanity, its flesh rotting and eyes milky white with death. Dave swung the crowbar wildly, catching the zombie in the shoulder. It stumbled but didn't fall, its decaying hands grasping at Dave's clothes. He stumbled backwards, knocking over a display of keychains that clattered to the floor. "Help!" Dave shouted, his calm vlogger persona shattered by panic. "Someone help me!" The zombie lunged forward, its jaw snapping inches from Dave's face. He could smell its putrid breath, feel the inhuman strength in its grip. In desperation, he thrust the camera forward, smashing it into the creature's face. The zombie reeled back, giving Dave just enough space to bring the crowbar down on its head with all his might. There was a sickening crunch, and the creature crumpled to the floor, finally still. Dave stood there, panting, his hands shaking as he looked at the fallen zombie. The reality of what he'd just done, what he'd had to do, hit him like a punch to the gut. He retched, emptying the meager contents of his stomach onto the dusty floor. "Dave!" Emily's voice called from outside. "Dave, are you okay?" He stumbled out of the gift shop, his face pale and camera dangling forgotten at his side. The others rushed to him, concern etched on their faces. "There was, in the shop," Dave gasped, struggling to form coherent sentences. Marcus pushed past him, axe raised, but emerged a moment later, shaking his head. "It's dead, for real this time. You did good, kid." Emily checked Dave over for injuries while Sarah hovered anxiously nearby. Jack and Rachel exchanged worried glances, the reality of their situation sinking in once more. "We need to keep moving," Jack said finally. "This place isn't safe." As they regrouped and shared what meager supplies they'd found, Dave struggled to regain his composure. He raised his camera, which had miraculously survived the encounter, and began to narrate once more. "Well, Toronto explorers," he said, his voice shaky but determined, "looks like Centerville isn't as abandoned as we thought. We've had our first encounter, but we're still here, still fighting." The group decided to head towards the Gibraltar Point Lighthouse, hoping its elevated position would provide a better vantage point and possibly a safe place to rest. As they made their way through the overgrown paths, the sun began to set, casting long shadows that seemed to reach for them with grasping fingers. Dave kept filming, documenting their journey through the once idyllic island paradise. He captured Sarah's wistful gaze at the abandoned swan boats, Marcus's grim determination as he hacked through overgrown vegetation, and Emily's quiet strength as she tended to their various scrapes and bruises. As night fell, they reached the lighthouse. Its white tower stood stark against the darkening sky, a beacon of hope in their increasingly desperate situation. "We'll set up camp here for the night," Marcus announced, already moving to secure the perimeter. Dave panned his camera around the base of the lighthouse, capturing the breathtaking view of Toronto's skyline across the water. The city lights still twinkled, a cruel reminder of the life they'd left behind. "It's beautiful," Sarah whispered, coming to stand beside him. Dave lowered his camera, turning to face her. "Yeah, it is. Hard to believe what's happening down there when you see it like this." Their moment of peace was shattered by a blood-curdling scream from inside the lighthouse. Dave and Sarah whirled around to see Rachel stumbling out of the door, her face pale with terror. "Tom!" she cried. "Something's got Tom!" The group rushed into the lighthouse, weapons raised. As they climbed the spiral staircase, the sounds of a struggle echoed from above. Dave's camera light illuminated the way, casting grotesque shadows on the walls. They burst onto the observation deck to find Tom grappling with two zombies. One had its teeth sunk into his arm, while the other clawed at his back. Marcus leapt forward, his axe arcing through the air to embed itself in the skull of the first zombie. Jack and Emily moved to help, but it was too late. The second zombie had torn into Tom's throat, and he collapsed to the floor, blood pooling around him. Rachel's anguished cry pierced the night as Marcus dispatched the remaining zombie. Dave filmed the aftermath, his hands shaking as he captured the group's shocked faces. Tom's body lay still, the lighthouse beam sweeping over the grisly scene with indifferent regularity. We need to make sure he doesn't turn," Emily said, her voice barely above a whisper. Marcus nodded grimly, raising his axe once more. Dave lowered his camera, unable to watch what came next. Sarah buried her face in his shoulder, her body racked with sobs. As the night wore on, the group huddled together in the lighthouse keeper's quarters, the weight of their loss hanging heavy in the air. Rachel sat apart, her eyes vacant and tear-streaked. Dave found a quiet corner to record his thoughts, his voice low to avoid disturbing the others. "Toronto explorers," he began, then paused, struggling to find the words. We lost someone today. Tom. He was a good guy, didn't deserve this. None of us do." He turned the camera to capture the haunted faces of his companions, lingering on Rachel's grief-stricken form. "This is the reality of our world now. Death is always just around the corner. But we can't give up. We have to keep fighting, keep surviving. For Tom, for ourselves, for anyone else out there still holding on to hope." As dawn broke, casting a pale light over the island, the group prepared to move on. They buried Tom near the lighthouse, a simple cairn of stones marking his final resting place. Dave stood at the edge of the observation deck, his camera trained on the city across the water. The infected roamed the streets, tiny figures from this distance, but no less terrifying. "We're heading back to the mainland," he narrated, his voice heavy with exhaustion and sorrow. "The islands aren't the sanctuary we hoped for, but we're alive, we're together, and we're not giving up." As they made their way down the lighthouse stairs, Dave couldn't shake the feeling that their ordeal was far from over. The Toronto Islands had tested them, pushed them to their limits, and taken one of their own. But as he looked at the determined faces of his companions, he felt a glimmer of hope. They were survivors, forged in the crucible of this new, terrifying world, and whatever challenges lay ahead on the mainland, they would face them together. "Stay tuned. Toronto explorers," Dave whispered into his camera as they stepped out into the morning light. "Our journey is far from over." Chapter 8. Descent into Darkness. The pale light of dawn crept over the Toronto Islands, casting long shadows across the makeshift grave where Tom now rested. Dave's camera panned across the somber faces of the survivors as they prepared to leave their temporary sanctuary. "Well, Toronto explorers," Dave narrated softly, his voice heavy with exhaustion and grief, "our time on the islands has come to an end. It wasn't the safe haven we hoped for, but then again, nowhere seems to be these days." The group gathered what meager supplies they had left and made their way to the shore. The boat they had arrived in was gone, likely stolen by other desperate survivors or swept away by the currents. "Looks like we're swimming," Marcus grunted, already wading into the chilly waters of Lake Ontario. Emily shook her head, her practical nature shining through even in their dire circumstances. "We'll freeze before we make it halfway. We need to build a raft." The next hour was spent scavenging for materials, planks from the decaying docks, empty plastic barrels that had washed ashore, even a tattered sail from an abandoned boat. Dave documented their efforts, his camera capturing the grim determination on their faces as they worked. As the makeshift raft took shape, Sarah approached Dave, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. Do you think we'll make it?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Dave lowered his camera, meeting her gaze. "We have to believe we will, Sarah. Hope is all we have left." With the raft complete, the survivors pushed off from the shore, leaving behind the false promise of safety the islands had offered. Dave filmed their departure, capturing the receding shoreline and the ominous silhouette of the city looming ahead. "We're heading back to the mainland," Dave narrated, his voice carrying over the gentle lapping of waves against their makeshift vessel. "The Gardner Expressway should give us a clear path to Union Station. If there's any hope of escape, it might be there." As they approached the shore, the devastation became clearer. Smoke still rose from various points in the city, and the once bustling waterfront was eerily silent. They made landfall near Ontario Place, the abandoned theme park a ghostly reminder of happier times. Marcus took point as they made their way towards the Gardner Expressway, his axe held at the ready. The group moved silently through the debris-strewn streets, every shadow and unexpected noise setting their nerves on edge. They reached the on-ramp to the expressway, and Dave couldn't help but gasp at the sight before them. The elevated highway, once a symbol of Toronto's bustling traffic, now stood as a monument to the chaos that had engulfed the city. Abandoned cars stretched as far as the eye could see, some overturned, others still containing the grisly remains of their former occupants. "My God," Emily whispered, her eyes wide as she took in the scene. Dave raised his camera, panning across the automotive graveyard. "Toronto explorers, we've reached the Gardner Expressway. I've seen it gridlocked before, but this is something else entirely." As they picked their way through the maze of vehicles, Dave couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end, and he found himself constantly glancing over his shoulder. Suddenly, a moan echoed from inside a nearby SUV. The group froze, weapons raised, as a zombie clawed at the window, its milky eyes fixed on them with mindless hunger. "Keep moving," Marcus hissed, urging them forward. "It's trapped. We don't want to attract more attention." They pressed on, the moans of the trapped infected fading behind them. But as they rounded a bend in the expressway, Dave's heart sank. A massive pileup blocked their path, a tangle of twisted metal and shattered glass that stretched across all lanes. "We can't go around," Jack said, frustration evident in his voice. "We'll have to go through." As they began to climb over and through the wreckage, Dave's camera captured the surreal scene. Sarah helped Rachel navigate a particularly treacherous section, while Emily kept watch for any signs of the infected. Halfway through the pileup, a piercing scream shattered the eerie silence. Dave whirled around to see Lisa, Jack's wife, being pulled into a crushed car by grasping, rotting hands. "Lisa!" Jack cried out, scrambling back towards her. But it was too late. By the time they reached her, Lisa had disappeared into the twisted metal, her screams abruptly silenced. Jack stood there, shock and grief etched on his face, as the others looked on in horror. "We have to keep moving," Marcus said after a moment, his voice gruff but not unkind. "There's nothing we can do for her now." Dave lowered his camera, unable to film Jack's raw anguish. As they continued their journey, the mood grew even more somber, the loss of Lisa weighing heavily on all of them. They finally cleared the pileup, only to find themselves facing a new challenge. The expressway ahead had partially collapsed, leaving a gaping hole in their path. Below, the streets teemed with the infected, drawn by the commotion of their passage. "We can't go back," Emily said, her eyes scanning the area for alternatives. "And we can't stay here." Dave panned his camera across the cityscape, searching for inspiration. His eyes landed on a familiar sight, the entrance to the PATH system, Toronto's underground pedestrian walkway. "There," he said, pointing. "If we can make it down to street level, we can use the path to get to Union Station. It might be safer than staying above ground." The group debated briefly, weighing the risks of navigating the zombie-infested streets against the unknown dangers that might lurk in the darkness below. In the end, They agreed that the path offered their best chance of reaching their destination. Descending from the expressway proved treacherous. They used a combination of rappelling with found ropes and careful climbing to make their way down. Dave filmed their descent, his hands shaking as he captured the dizzying drop and the sea of infected below. As they reached street level, the moans of the zombies grew louder. The group sprinted towards the path entrance, dodging grasping hands and snapping jaws. Marcus brought up the rear, his axe swinging in wide arcs to keep the infected at bay. They burst through the doors of the path entrance, quickly barricading it behind them. The sudden silence was almost deafening after the chaos outside. Dave's camera light illuminated the dusty corridor stretching before them, the once bustling underground mall now a tomb-like cavern. "We made it," Sarah gasped, bent over with her hands on her knees as she caught her breath. Dave panned his camera around the group, capturing their exhausted but relieved faces. "Toronto explorers," he narrated, his voice echoing slightly in the empty hallway. "We've entered the path system. Once a maze of shops and food courts, now, well, we're about to find out." As they ventured deeper into the path, the darkness seemed to press in around them. Dave's camera light cast long, eerie shadows on the walls, and every creaking pipe or distant echo set their nerves on edge. They passed abandoned storefronts, their windows dark and displays gathering dust. Overturned chairs and scattered papers told the story of a hasty evacuation. In one food court, they found trays of rotting food still sitting on tables, a chilling snapshot of the moment when normalcy had given way to chaos. "Keep an eye out for supplies," Emily reminded them as they moved through the underground labyrinth. Water, non-perishable food, anything useful. They scavenged what they could from vending machines and abandoned backpacks, but pickings were slim. It seemed others had had the same idea, stripping the path of most usable resources. As they approached a junction in the tunnels, a sound froze them in their tracks. Shuffling footsteps echoed from one of the adjoining corridors, growing louder by the second. "Hide!" Marcus hissed, ushering them behind an overturned kiosk. Dave's camera peered around the edge of their hiding spot, capturing a group of infected as they stumbled into view. The zombies moved aimlessly, their vacant eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of prey. The survivors held their breath, hardly daring to move as the infected shuffled past. Dave's heart pounded so loudly he was sure the zombies would hear it. But after what felt like an eternity, the infected moved on, disappearing down another tunnel. "That was too close," Jack whispered, his face pale in the dim light. As they emerged from their hiding spot, Dave noticed something that made his blood run cold. Sarah was missing. "Sarah?" he called out in a hushed voice, panic rising in his throat. "Sarah, where are you?" The group spread out, searching frantically for any sign of the young woman. Dave's camera swept back and forth, its light illuminating empty corridors and abandoned shops. Suddenly, a muffled cry echoed from nearby. They rushed towards the sound, rounding a corner to find Sarah backed against a wall, a lone infected advancing on her. Without hesitation, Marcus charged forward, his axe arcing through the air to embed itself in the zombie's skull. Sarah collapsed into Emily's arms, sobbing with relief and fear. Dave filmed the aftermath, his hands shaking as he captured the group's shocked faces and the fallen infected at their feet. "It's okay, Sarah," Emily soothed, stroking the young woman's hair. "You're safe now. We've got you." As the adrenaline of the moment faded, the reality of their situation sank in once more. They were trapped in a dark, maze-like underground system with no clear way out and the constant threat of the infected lurking around every corner. Dave turned his camera to face himself, his expression grim in the harsh light. "Toronto explorers," he said softly. "We're deep in the path now, heading towards Union Station. But the journey is far from over. The darkness down here, it's not just physical, it's seeping into our souls, testing us in ways we never imagined." As they prepared to move on, Dave couldn't shake the feeling that their ordeal in the path was only beginning. The underground tunnels stretched out before them, a labyrinth of shadows and hidden dangers. But somewhere in that darkness lay their destination, Union Station, and the faint hope of escape it represented. With renewed determination, the survivors pressed on, their footsteps echoing in the eerie silence of Toronto's underground. The path, once a symbol of the city's bustling commerce, had become a tomb-like reminder of all they had lost. But as long as they kept moving, as long as they stuck together, there was still hope. And Dave would be there to document every step of their harrowing journey, his camera a silent witness to their struggle for survival in the darkness beneath the city. Chapter 9. The Final Stand. The path system spat them out into the harsh light of day, the survivors blinking against the sudden brightness as they emerged near City Hall. Dave's camera panned across Nathan Phillips Square, capturing the eerie stillness of what should have been one of Toronto's busiest public spaces. "We made it, Toronto explorers," Dave whispered into his lens, his voice hoarse from their underground ordeal. "City Hall. If there's any hope of evacuation, it should be here." But as they ventured further into the square, that hope quickly evaporated. The iconic curved towers of City Hall loomed over a scene of utter devastation. Abandoned emergency vehicles littered the area, their lights still flashing silently. Tents and barricades spoke of a hastily established safe zone, now overrun and deserted. And everywhere, the infected roamed. "Oh God," Sarah whimpered, shrinking back as a group of zombies shuffled across the reflecting pool, the water stained dark with blood and worse. Marcus gripped his axe tighter, his knuckles white. "We need to move. Now." As they crept along the edge of the square, Dave's camera captured the surreal juxtaposition of the modern architecture against the apocalyptic scene. The Toronto sign, once a cheerful photo opportunity for tourists, now stood as a mocking reminder of the city that was. Emily pointed towards the west tower of City Hall. "There. If we can make it inside, we might be able to barricade ourselves in. Maybe find supplies or something." They moved as one, years of survival instincts honed to a razor's edge. Dave filmed their progress, his narration barely above a whisper. "We're making our way to City Hall, folks. It's our last hope for finding any kind of organized evacuation, but I've got to be honest, it's not looking good." As they neared the entrance, a piercing shriek split the air. A zombie, fresher than most they'd encountered, charged at them from behind an overturned hot dog cart. Jack, still raw with grief over Lisa's loss, reacted too slowly. The infected slammed into him, teeth sinking into his shoulder. "No," Rachel cried out, her voice strangled with anguish. Marcus's axe whistled through the air, cleaving the zombie's skull, but the damage was done. Jack stumbled, blood pouring from the vicious bite wound. "Inside now," Emily ordered, already moving to support Jack's weight. They burst through the doors of City Hall, Marcus and Sarah working quickly to barricade the entrance with whatever they could find. Dave's camera light illuminated the once grand lobby, now a tomb of bureaucratic aspirations. As Emily tended to Jack's wound, Dave panned across the faces of his companions. The toll of their journey was etched in every line, every haunted gaze. They had come so far, lost so much, and now— "It's over," Jack gasped, his face pale and slick with sweat. "The evac— there's no one left. We're on our own." Emily shook her head, her nurse's determination shining through even now. "We don't know that. There could still be." But Jack cut her off with a bitter laugh. "Look around, Doc. This was supposed to be the safe zone. If there was anyone left to help us, they'd be here." A heavy silence fell over the group, broken only by Jack's labored breathing. Dave lowered his camera, the weight of their situation pressing down on him like a physical force. Sarah was the first to speak, her voice small but steady. "So what do we do now?" Marcus ran a hand over his face, exhaustion evident in every movement. "We fortify, rest, figure out our next move." As the others moved to secure their position, Dave found a quiet corner to record his thoughts. He turned the camera on himself, his face haggard in the harsh light. "Toronto explorers," he began, then paused, struggling to find the words. "I don't know if anyone's still out there watching, but if you are, if you've somehow made it this far, don't come to City Hall. There's nothing here but death and disappointment." He panned the camera around the lobby, lingering on his companions as they worked. "We came here looking for salvation, for some sign that the world hadn't completely gone to hell. But all we found was more of the same. The infection, the chaos, it's everywhere." Dave's voice cracked as he continued, raw emotion bleeding through. "I started this journey as a vlogger, an observer. I thought I could document the fall of civilization, maybe even help people survive. But now I'm just another survivor, clinging to life by my fingernails. He turned the camera back to his face, his eyes shining with unshed tears. If anyone's still out there, still fighting, find somewhere safe, somewhere far from here. The Toronto we knew is gone. All that's left is... A crash from above cut him off mid-sentence. The group froze, eyes darting to the ceiling. "What was that?" Sarah whispered, fear etched on her face. Before anyone could answer, a familiar moan echoed through the building. Then another, and another. "They're inside," Marcus growled, hefting his axe. Emily finished bandaging Jack's wound, her movements quick and efficient. "We need to move, higher ground." As they gathered what supplies they could, Dave's mind raced. They had come so far, survived so much. It couldn't end here, in the very heart of the city they had once called home. Hope. They burst out of City Hall into a world gone mad. But they were together, they were alive, and they had a purpose. The CN Tower loomed in the distance, a beacon of possibility in a city of death. As they ran, dodging zombies and leaping over debris, Dave's camera bounced at his side. He no longer filmed every moment, every horror. Now, he ran with his companions, an active participant in their desperate bid for survival. The final stand at City Hall had failed, but maybe, just maybe, their true final stand was yet to come. One last broadcast, one last chance to make a difference. Chapter 10, A Broadcast of Hope. The Residence Inn loomed before them, its imposing silhouette contrasting with the chaos engulfing the city below. Dave's camera, battered but still functional, captured the determination on the faces of his fellow survivors as they approached the Residence Inn. "This is it, folks," Dave whispered into the lens, his voice hoarse from exhaustion. "Our last stand. If there's any hope left in this city, it's up there." The area surrounding the Residence Inn was a graveyard of abandoned tourist dreams. Overturned souvenir carts, discarded maple leaf flags, and the eerie silence of a place once filled with excited chatter created a surreal backdrop to their desperate mission. As they neared the entrance, the familiar moans of the infected grew louder. A horde of zombies, drawn by their movement, shambled out from behind a tour bus, their lifeless eyes fixed on the survivors with mindless hunger. "Run!" Marcus shouted, hefting his axe and charging forward to clear a path. The group sprinted towards the Residence Inn's glass entry door, dodging grasping hands and snapping jaws. Sarah stumbled, nearly falling prey to a lunging zombie, but Emily yanked her to safety at the last moment. They burst through the doors, quickly barricading them with whatever they could find. Jack, his face pale and slick with sweat from his infected wound, collapsed against a wall, his breathing labored. "We need to keep moving," Emily urged, her nurse's instincts warring with the grim reality of their situation. "Jack, can you make it?" Jack shook his head, a bitter smile on his face. "You know I can't, Doc. I'm done for. But I can buy you some time." Dave lowered his camera, the weight of Jack's sacrifice hitting him like a physical blow. "Jack, no. There has to be another way." But Jack's mind was made up. He struggled to his feet, gripping a fire extinguisher like a club. "You get to that broadcast room, Dave. Let the world know we're still here, still fighting. I'll hold them off as long as I can." With tears in their eyes, the survivors said their goodbyes. As they made their way to the elevators, Dave's camera captured Jack's final moments, a man facing certain death with courage and resolve. The elevator ride was tense, each floor bringing them closer to their goal but also to unknown dangers. Dave panned across the faces of his companions, capturing their mix of fear and determination. "If anyone's still watching," he narrated softly, "this is it. Our last chance to make a difference, to show that even in the darkest times, humanity can still shine through." The doors opened onto the observation deck, and for a moment, they were struck by the breathtaking view of Toronto spread out before them. The city they had once called home now lay in ruins, smoke rising from various points on the horizon, but there was no time to admire the view. The broadcast room was just ahead, and with it, their last hope of reaching out to any survivors who might be listening. As they approached the room, a blood-curdling shriek split the air. A group of infected tourists, trapped on the observation deck since the outbreak began, charged towards them. "Go!" Marcus yelled, positioning himself between the zombies and his friends. "I'll hold them off. Dave, Emily, get that broadcast out." Sarah hesitated, torn between staying with Marcus and following the others. In that moment of indecision, a zombie lunged at her. Marcus's axe flashed through the air, saving her life, but leaving him vulnerable to attack. "Sarah! Run!" he growled, grappling with the infected. Tears streaming down her face, Sarah turned and fled after Dave and Emily. The sounds of Marcus's desperate battle faded as they entered the broadcast room, quickly barricading the door behind them. Dave's hands shook as he surveyed the equipment before him. "I don't know how to work any of this," he admitted, panic rising in his voice. Emily stepped forward, her eyes scanning the control panel. "I interned at a radio station in college. It can't be that different, right?" As Emily worked to get the equipment online, Dave turned his camera to Sarah, who stood by the window, her gaze fixed on the city below. "Sarah," he said softly, "are you okay?" She turned to him, her eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and determination. "No," she replied honestly, "but I will be. We have to be. For them." A crackle of static filled the room, and Emily's triumphant voice cut through their moment. "I've got it! We're live!" Dave rushed to the microphone, his heart pounding. This was it, their last chance to make a difference. "Hello, Toronto," he began, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "This is Dave, broadcasting from the Residence Inn. If anyone can hear this, if anyone's still out there fighting, you're not alone." As Dave spoke, pouring his heart out to an unknown audience, Emily kept watch at the door. The sounds of infected trying to break through grew louder, but she held firm, determined to give Dave the time he needed. "We've lost so much," Dave continued, his voice cracking with emotion. "Our homes, our loved ones, the world we knew. But we're still here, we're still human, and as long as we hold on to that humanity, there's hope." Sarah joined Emily at the door, the two women bracing themselves against the increasing onslaught. Dave's words flowed faster, driven by the urgency of their situation. "If you're out there, if you're listening, don't give up. Find each other. Help each other. The infected may have taken our city, but they can't take our spirit. We are in Toronto. We are strong. We are survivors." A loud crash from outside the room signaled that their time was running out. Emily turned to Dave, her face grim. "We need to go. Now." Dave nodded, his message reaching its crescendo. "This is Dave, signing off from the Residence Inn. Stay safe, stay human, and never stop fighting. Toronto lives on in each of us." As he stepped away from the microphone, a strange calm settled over him. They had done it. Whether anyone had heard them or not, they had made their stand. "Now what?" Sarah asked, her voice small but steady. Dave looked at his companions, Emily, the nurse who had kept them alive against all odds, Sarah, the tourist who had found strength she never knew she possessed. He thought of Marcus and Jack, who had sacrificed themselves so they could reach this point. "Now," Dave said, raising his camera one last time, "we fight." Whatever horrors lay ahead, Dave knew that his longtime friend Damon was somewhere out there fighting the same battles, and Dave was determined to find him sooner than later.